Hello and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson and Tim Shaw. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. Most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that every veteran deserves a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, earn, and build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. Our primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode.
Today, we're delighted to have Steve Gilman, the co-founder and CEO of OneRange, with us. And I'm also honored and blessed to have Carina and Lenore Karafa as part of the podcast. Steve, you've got an incredible background. I'll just quickly go through it. Intelligence officer, Major League Baseball athlete, prior founder, and now building something for teams to really grow their teams and make them smarter and wiser. Before we get into the whole nitty gritty and what you're building at OneRange, can you share more about your background?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Tim, Lenore, Carina. Thanks for having me. It's quite an honor to listen to the show a lot on my train ride. So I come to you live from Manhattan in New York City, where OneRange is headquartered. Look, my background, I've been fortunate enough to be in a lot of different places doing a lot of different things and stayed disciplined throughout those things. But it's very non-traditional, as you may say. So I went to undergrad. I was a mechanical engineer. A lot of what I wanted to do was become a Navy pilot. I was born in 1985, 1 year before Top Gun. Thought that was awesome. Always liked the physics and math component. I played baseball throughout that journey. So I was drafted and played baseball for the Detroit Tigers for about 3 years after school. Enjoyed that time, went around the country, mostly on a bus in the minor leagues, learning about building a team and how that team can change, and also a lot about closing pitching and the game. So after a multitude of injuries, I ended up kind of understanding that there was a bigger world outside of what I was doing on a ball field in a specific city every day. And I started just getting into whatever my friends that graduated to school were into. And I found myself drawn towards the government and defense. I had friends overseas with intelligence agencies. I had friends that had joined the militaries and were getting a lot of responsibility. And so I was the guy in spring training that did not play the card games before the anthem, but rather I was reading books, CIA Legacy of Ashes, a lot of fiction, spy novels and things like that. And I just couldn't pull myself away from it. So I ended up retiring from baseball after a very successful spring training and said, hey, I'm going to go figure out something a little bit bigger than myself. I joined the Department of Defense, the Defense Intelligence Agency, marrying my mechanical engineering background with national defense. And I worked on counterproliferation, stopping parts and components from bad countries going to other bad countries. And found myself doing that for a while, spent about 1.5 years overseas and worked a lot with Navy special warfare. There was a time in my life where I just said, hey, I love my day job, but I cannot ignore the fact that the organization is a lot bigger than me. And the people around me, friends, peers, managers, bosses, subordinates, is what actually matters. So I felt like I could be replaced the next day as an intelligence officer. I did not think the organization could replace everyone there. All that is to say is I started to get interested in organizational behavior. So I decided to go back to business school, learn about organizational change, organizational management, science and motivation, as well as the finance marketing components I didn't have from my traditional undergrad career. Ended up joining the reserves as a direct commission officer, thanks to my rank at DIA. And I still serve today in a counterterrorism unit out of Fort Dix, New Jersey. But I ended up finding a path after graduating from business school in entrepreneurship. It was kind of the one thing that allowed me to build a culture from the beginning. Everything I did mattered and I was accountable for it. And you get to surround yourself with great people if you do it right. So I launched a company called Blockparty in 2015. I've launched OneRange about 3 years ago. In September, and I've just been having a blast applying all the lessons I learned from my first startup as well as my varied career to get to where I am today.
Fascinating. Thank you for that background. Can you walk us through how you got to building OneRange? What was the reason for building OneRange, and how's it going right now?
Yeah, thanks. So during COVID, my Block Party was a live event business. So the world kind of froze over in the world of Division I football tailgating and amphitheater live music, and it's come back. But I had a chance to really understand what from my first startup founding experience and building a team was really important. And it always came down to people, co-founder, the team you're with, the investors you bring on, the customers you serve, often overlooked, right? But those are the people you hang out with on a daily basis. And so I had an itch to start another company. I knew I wanted to get back into technology. I knew I wanted to do it out of New York City. And I knew I wanted to start it with one of my best friends, Hutan, who is a multiple time founder and chief technology type, right? So he builds amazing, amazing products. That's about as much as we had. We didn't have an idea for a business or anything else. And so the idea was basically to sit down and figure out something that we are incredibly passionate about, that we could scale really quickly and use our skills. And if we couldn't, it wasn't going to be a good fit. But we spent about 6 months kind of figuring out what we cared about the most. And I tell you, we ran through the gamut. So I'd build the business plan, I'd run it by investors. Hutan would build a prototype. If we ran out of passion in a few weeks, we were done with it. If we thought there was a scalable path, we'd kind of continue on. And so we had an application that was going to help people negotiate the first car. We had a company, I think I still built them on LinkedIn, called Evermail. We were going to solve the mail issue. This is back in 2021. So many different ideas. And eventually we sat down, kind of exhausted, right? Because we didn't find something we're passionate about. And I said, man, like, I feel like it should be a B2B people play. And we both started to understand that the biggest issues that we have in the corporate world is organizations that try to invest in their people to grow talent didn't have a great way to do that. And the way we functionally figured that out is Hutan had a tuition reimbursement issue when he worked for Lockheed Martin. I had a tuition reimbursement issue when I got a master's degree out of the Department of Defense. And we basically said, it kind of makes sense if people need to upskill. Usually your top talent's always asking for it. What's the business model here? And we quickly, within a few minutes, landed on the fact that everybody needs professional development, not just tuition reimbursement, and that companies were struggling to do it. And once we kind of came up with the idea that that's what the issue was for us working in the corporate world and for the people under us that work in the corporate world, we started coming up with all the examples as operators where employees were asking us for stuff and we didn't have a good way to do it. Hey, I'd like to take a course here. Hey, I'd like to go back to this conference. It was the best conference I've ever been to. And so OneRange was launched under this concept that it should be more human-centric upskilling. Intrinsic motivation usually comes from within the learner, not necessarily the company pushing learning on something. And we ultimately decided it was something we were passionate about for the next 20 years, that we were going to work on it, or in the space to make this happen. It's the biggest corporate issue that we've seen to date. And now the technology exists to solve all the problems that we have. And so that's the roundabout way that we got to OneRange and started building. But we haven't lost an ounce of that passion. So we're very proud of the process we took to actually get to the idea that we're working on a daily basis.
Awesome, Steve. Thanks for that background. So I think for some of our listeners, they know that you're in the startup company now with OneRange and you have some background on that. I think for some other folks who don't know that you started off in professional baseball, that's pretty cool. So I'm curious if you find any similarities or parallels between baseball and the startup world.
Yeah, it's a great question. Baseball is interesting because any sport really, you have a very defined goal and then you work hard and smart to try to get it, right? And you keep your team together along the way. What do I mean? Well, your goal is to score more runs than the other team has and eventually win more games and win the World Series. It's very clear and defined. Business, you have to define your own goals, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, like a startup, a week-to-week basis, or eventually a vision into what the World Series is for you. So I learned a lot of different components about team, adversity, winning, losing, failing, excelling, egos, personalities, dropping different people into the mix and trying to form around like a world-class team. But I did not have the skills later to learn about how to set goals and rally a team around that when you don't exactly know if that's the right goal. Is it the right thing for us this week to be working on the right pieces? The other thing I'll kind of say that lends into what we're doing. When I played baseball, I knew who I was after I retired, people started asking me why I played baseball. I like throwing things. I'm good at it. Eventually, it's just part of who I was. Now, 8 years into being a founder and entrepreneur, I know this is what I am. So there's different parallels between being experts in what you do that functionally define who you are. And so when founders talk about not being able to get away from business, or it's my baby, it's what I do, you completely get that the day you start a company, right? Because you're on a path on your own. The other thing I'll kind of mention, just like with, top tier military, in baseball, especially professional baseball, where you're getting paid to do a job and you're trying to take money out of someone else's pocket to feed your family. That was the phrasing back then. You're upskilling 99.9% of the time, right? We used to call it working on your trade, but you are, for a closing pitcher, someone who comes in the ninth inning and hopefully throws 10 pitches and leaves the game, 99.9% of your time is trying to figure out how to make each pitch better, gaining intelligence on the other players, fielding your position, which may or may not happen in any given game. And so you're just spending all of your time training for the one moment that kind of matters. And it's interesting because in the corporate world, a lot of it matters, but look, that one pitch that you give, the one customer that you say the right thing to, the investor that you talk to that happens to bring that moment, you have to be continuously learning. And so the parallels there are kind of like, you if that's who you are, you can't stop doing it. And the only way to get ahead in the near future or long future has to do with just how much information you can consume and how much you work on your trade.
I would just love to pull that thread though on high performance leaders and teams a little bit. It's a topic that I've just been professionally fascinated by for literally, well, my entire career. But can you tell us in your own words, like what are some of the characteristics of those high performing leaders and teams, having seen that both on the military side and in professional baseball?
Yeah, great question. Baseball comes down to a lot of individual performance. A lot of what I didn't love about professional baseball that actually I was more satisfied with in college. Professional baseball, you could be on 8 different minor league teams within the same system before you make it to the majors, right? So individually, you're trying to scale up. Everybody kind of knows that. College, it was all about the team you played for and your win-loss record, right? Of course, you want to get drafted, but like that's there. Military's all about team. So there's no mission you can do singularly, and people don't talk about doing it on their own when they know there's a huge team and support system behind them. But I think for high performing managers in the corporate world, it more resonates with military teams and organizations. By that, I've always found that the best leaders of high performing teams are always those who are willing to share or delve all of the credit onto their team, take kind of losses on their own shoulder so that the team can keep performing. And then look, like when it comes down to, we talk about delegating as the manager term, but the more you can give people freedom to reach their potential, the easier your job actually gets as a manager and a leader, right? So setting goals and setting the benchmarks for where you want to be and setting those expectations is key. It sounds simple, really hard to do. You have to understand a lot of complexities and understand people. But once you're on a high performing team and everyone's excelling, your job actually gets easier and everybody's a lot happier. The one piece from the military that's always been a little tougher to reconcile in the corporate world, especially with, so I'm a Navy reservist. I kind of get plunked into a unit kind of wherever I live. Where I excelled working with the military was in Navy Special Warfare, where you get to select the people, right? There's some kind of vetting process of coming onto the team. The larger military, because of the size of the organization, has a lot to do with helping people who are struggling, leading, even though there's people on your team that can't be pushed aside. And right, so there's a lot of, one of the reasons I went to business school is like to figure that piece out. When you run a startup, when you run a company, there's sometimes you just can't change people, the way they interact, the two-way fit, their mission, their drive, their personal, whatever it comes into. And so running a company is a perfect blend of what I saw in individual performance in professional baseball with the team camaraderie and making sure everybody gets across the finish line in the military. But you have a little bit more flexibility, especially when you start with a company of 2 people, right? So you get to vet the people you come in, you get to work with, and then you just get to let them flourish and kind of set the goals and do great things behind them. Easier said than done. But startups is where it's at. Like there's no more creativity that I can add to this world outside of trying to build a business system that helps others at scale.
Piggybacking off of what you were talking about with teams, we recently asked you what kind of startup advice do you have? And you said you can't change people, so spend time finding the best ones to work with and for. So you just spoke about teams, but what I'm curious is, as you were fundraising for OneRange, you talk to investors, you talk to VCs, angels, etc. How do you know when it's the right time to say yes, and how do you know when it's the right time to say no?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, so look, when it's very apparent, in my last company, it was very apparent. I think we had like 25 angel investors and then some institutional, some corporate strategics. Out of those 25 angel investors, there was 2 that didn't act right when things were going poorly. They also didn't act right when things were going really well, right? You get a term sheet to sell the company. No matter what the number is, it's not high enough, so they give you grief. When things are not going well, it's always something that you've done wrong. And so when you identify those folks, it's very, very easy to say, okay, we're going to part ways. You're not going to be a part of my next business, right? Or my career as an entrepreneur, investor, and everything else. Awesome. What you pinged on is figuring that out, the character in order to say yes or no. And I'll say, just for all founders, when there's a dynamic of you're fundraising for money for a company that in the early stage is probably not profitable because you're delving into R&D and technology, it's very hard to say no to people. So the first time founder thing, both for myself and Hutam, be able to uncover that a little bit and know the downsides of saying yes to the wrong people, but actually tactically figuring out who's going to be good and who's going to be bad in your circle usually comes down to other founders, right? So the same due diligence that investors do to understand your company, how you interact with employees, how you interact with customers, you have to do. And it takes time, but you have to do when it comes down to letting investors into your world. Giving an investor your cell phone number is a big deal, whether or not they have any power in the company, right? Structure wise. And so a lot of the times you're relying on trusted founders that you've been in the trenches with. I'm at a co-working center today. There's tons of founders here, right? And so with my Intel background, 6 degrees of freedom, there's always a way to get someone who knows to someone who's invested in them that they can say, yes, this is the person you want on the cap table, or no, stay away from this person for these reasons. And so a trusted network there is a great way to understand if someone's going to be a fit or not. And then it always comes down to just having the power and the ability or the guts to say no if you know it's not a right fit. And that's not always an easy situation for first-time founders, especially.
Just want to say I love hearing that because it's very important to us to be in the trenches with our entrepreneurs and knowing that you all vet that. I think it's important because to my mind, I also want to see the good investors, those that are side by side with the entrepreneurs. Those are the ones that eventually win out too. So that's fantastic.
Lenore, you hit on it, right? But it's kind of our career. When you're pitching for investment or when you're saying I'm going to invest other people's money as a professional investor, it is your career. So whether I start another company or invest or take this one 22 years down the road after being public, we're in it together. And so you get to choose, even though it's different roles, who you're paired up with and who understands if things go really well or really poorly, that over the long term, you're going to win with that person, whether it's in operating, investing, or otherwise. So it's hard day one to say, hey, this investor isn't the right fit. I'm not going to take their money. I've heard that on a PowerPoint presentation in business school, which they do have. But 8 years in, I can tell you that I don't lose sleep over customers saying no when it's not a right fit, or employees telling me they need more flexibility or they can't get the job done and they need some help, or even financial stuff. I've always lost sleep, and I believe this is true for most founders, dealing with people situations, right? like an investor that wasn't a right fit, that has way too many questions at the wrong time when I need to be doing something else, an employee that you know is not a fit. That's what keeps you up at night, is those relationships. And it's very different from like the cold and hard, here's what's on a PowerPoint, go get the business and financials set.
That's right. Do you mind noting that you're not a first-time founder, maybe elaborating on a few more of those lessons learned from those earlier startup journeys?
Yeah, perfect. So I at a business school, I wasn't. I'll go into this a little bit. I actually accepted, because I needed an internship that paid. I accepted a job at IBM under their General Management Leadership Development Program, GMLDP. Great selective program. I accepted that in November of my second year of business school. Still did not know what I wanted to do. Just thought it was a good fit, right? Tech company, general management, naval officer sounds about right, and they liked it too. I worked my butt off, knowing that it was kind of the last year that I had to completely explore everything I want. And I created Blockparty. My co-founder and I sold about $500,000 of tailgating contracts in the live event space before graduation. Started the company the day after graduation, called IBM, told them I'm not coming. They were actually very happy. It's not like I was recruiting for a different job. It's just they wanted to recruit entrepreneurs. I found this path. They also told me that there's no other opportunity like this, and if it failed, I could not come back because of the structure of the program. Made me nervous. I was a little risk adverse. I am an engineer at heart. We took Blockparty, took all the punches and blows. It was not an easy industry to get into, but it was very challenging, which motivated us. We grew it. We had about a $9 million run rate, 7 to 10 year contracts with Division I schools, investment board members from Live Nation, full-time team of about 40, with about 160 part-time folks around the country running events, just to give you an idea of like the scale. At 40 people in office in Dallas, Texas, it's a different company than starting it right from the ground. So some of the lessons learned, obviously it's all about the people. Greatest mistakes I probably made were in hiring, which I realize is still very incredibly hard to do. There's not a functional academic or degree that you can get that helps you vet and understand people and their motivations. So hiring, the best advice that I've gotten, and then I'll pass along, is probably from an attorney who does the paperwork, right, and advises you when you're firing somebody. But basically hire slow, make sure you get to know that person. It's going to be a long-term commitment, and then fire fast. As soon as your gut tells you something, or you see the red flags, you got to get rid of it for culture and for other reasons. And so acknowledging and embracing that that's just going to be a part of business and career is an element of it. And then look, the ambiguity and trying to keep a team together takes a lot of work through different things that you can't control, like market dynamics or what customers are doing or what budgets look like. And so all you can do is evolve a business model, hire the right people, and then motivate them towards the right direction. Again, I think there's great founders that come into it knowing all these pieces are very tough. But the grit around when things don't go well on any given day that you're not expecting, and to be able to be a professional, a leader, and to come back in and step up for your company, your shareholders, your customers, and everything else is kind of a different thing that I think that can actually be learned, or at least dealt with better when you're starting your second company. Also say just having a co-founder who hands on his third company, you're able to shortcut a lot, right? In terms of not making mistakes you did earlier in your first companies. You're able to identify more of a critical path. What should you be working on day to day? What should be deprioritized? And then look, it's all, what am I doing today? How do I get it done this week? But you're able to see 6 months out what's actually going to be mattering, right? And listening to the right people. And so we've been able to avoid pitfalls in a second startup, making the hard times a little bit easier, whether you're expecting them or whether you're just able to get around them altogether to not feel it. But on a, just how smooth a crazy chaotic startup can go, 100%, 99% better than the first time when you just don't know as much.
So I think with your team, you have Futan, you have some other folks on the team that we've met, and they're great people. I think you are really well, or you're ready to be very customer facing, which you have been thus far. I'm curious what advice you have for other startups, across all industries listening, how to source your clients and how to source the best customers, whether it's like marketing, advice or paid media, earned media, whatever, skills you're doing.
Yeah. Um, so that's a great question. Look, it's 2024. Building a marketing plan, while it may not be everyone's expertise, is not terribly difficult. I mean, there's intelligence tools to know what your competitors pay for Google ads and how many conversions they get from referral websites and everything else, right? And so ChatGPT can lay out a moderately good marketing plan for you. Now, in the startup world, no one cares how much money you spend on ads. It's all about thought leadership, brand perspective. And you really have to, because it should be a new and innovative idea, right? Something that people aren't terribly used to. It's got to get hit home with like the few adopters. And so a lot of the advice that we've taken and kind of gone with is building content, podcasts, videos, thought leadership pieces, blogs on secrets that you're uncovering in your industry that maybe no one else is looking at. Because even if it's, 2% of the 100 people that look at the blog I wrote about human-centric learning and why it should be done and the issues with it, you only need those 2 people to come to you to ask to be customers, right? So you can't cast a net that's too wide. You actually, in some cases, have to be a little bit more polarizing to where some people are going to tell you, hey, that's a crazy idea, never going to work on the customer side. And others are going to say, it's something I thought about and I think it could be interesting. Let's explore more. And that gives you a chance to get with them. There's a certain point where you can transition more into paid and traditional and start working on the numbers there. But, for the first 25, 30, 40 customers in the B2B SaaS world, they're coming to you because they see something a little bit different. They want to innovate and they believe in the same thing intrinsically than you do. And you only get that out through earned media, content, right? All the kind of production steps we talked about. You can't necessarily pay for those things.
So I'd love to jump in on, what are some of those pain points that you're addressing through OneRange for these customers?
Yeah.
And why are you different?
Yeah. No, I talked about not having a learning and development background. So there's a lot of professionals incredibly good, dedicated their whole lives to learning and development within a company. As an outsider, as a technologist coming in and saying, you know what, I can't meet someone on the street and ask them about their experience in learning and development as an employee and get a good response. Hey, my company's really helping throughout my career. I feel empowered to do whatever I want. I'm getting to the next level. I've had some very clear. You talk to a company, especially the executives, right, the CEO types, the vision for what they want, they usually talk about. Hey, my employees get whatever they want. If they want a coach, they get a coach. If they want a course, they get a course. It is so easy to upskill nowadays. There's so many resources. Talk to an employee, the same one that I would meet on the street. I don't know how to do this. I can't fork over $2,000 for the seminar. I'll just sit on it, Google some free resources, go from there. So what's happening functionally in there is learning and development means something very different for the company than it does for the employees it's trying to serve. Learning and development during a soft period in the market, like we've been experiencing, means compliance and onboarding training. It's the things you must do for companies. What employees always ask for is upskilling. How do I professionally and personally get better at my job so that I can really excel? And especially with the younger generation, I mean, the stats are incredible. They're looking to companies to do that even before they get bumps in salary because they know that they're learning to eventually earn. And so functionally what it comes down to it, if you Google the learning and development market, you see a huge number, $360 billion globally, $120 billion in the US is spent on training, learning, and development. Recent estimates have come out that 2/3 of what companies actually spend on upskilling, skill development, is outside of that learning and development budget. And the reason for that is because people will spend it on their own. Maybe they'll get reimbursed, maybe they won't. Managers will spend ahead of a department, will get learning tools for the department and never talk to the people in charge of learning and development. because there's a time issue. And the time is my sales rep needs to get up to speed now. So I'm going to get him or her 3 books, a podcast, and a negotiations course so that they can start selling to hit my numbers. HR and learning and development is not empowered to help that individual at a corporate level. And so there's a huge time lag. What does that actually mean, Lenore? Like, we are helping individually upskill people through this marketplace approach, unprecedented access to any resource you need, high quality, around the globe, in any location, any language, through any provider in any format. That's awesome. That's powerful because there's tons of providers that can help you throughout your career. For the company, now they're getting complete budget control. They're getting access and visibility. And we don't usually talk about this on the website, but like, they're now understanding what skills their people are getting about 8 months before they need to make any decisions on something. So the easiest example into the powerful intelligence that we have is when AI came out, everybody thought it'd be great to be an engineer and know about this AI. And then people started to learn, oh, it's good for marketers. Oh, it's good for executives. Oh, it's good to have a pilot. We knew that on our system because we're very employee driven. So when you look at larger organizations and how to keep up with the skills that people want, use the data for what people are actually doing. And so we're just believing that we're a platform that helps leverage the data to make sure that people are getting the right choices and that companies are understanding how their workforce is upskilling. It's a powerful tool when you put it in the hands of each employee and give them access and empower them to do what they need to. Back to the delegation and making sure your team goes on the right path. And so there's all kinds of different primary, secondary, and tertiary ROIs that come out of making sure someone's getting the right education for where they are.
Absolutely. So what does success look like for OneRange, both, short term, next 6 to 12 months, and then longer term?
6 to 8 months, we've really focused in on the key customer who's been attracted to the voice and what we're speaking about, which tends to be smaller companies. So I'll go back to that big learning and development number. You'll see if you just wrote a business plan, what companies are spending on training, learning, and development, it gets higher the larger the company is. They have more resources, makes kind of sense. Our sweet spot is with companies under 1,000 that don't have access to all those resources. It's not that they're that budget constraint, they just have no great way to deploy, understand, and track it. And so one of our near term, I'll call it 6 to 8 month goals, is to really focus in on SMB customers where we don't see a lot of competition for an automate your employee upskilling type platform like ours, and just keep making sure that we're serving those customers right. The unit economics make a lot of sense for us as people continue to increase the spend on their employees. And heck, we'll just say it, like HR teams, executive teams in charge of these programs are smaller than they ever have been for, say, a 500 person company. So you no longer have 12 HR representatives, some in charge of training. You maybe have 2. And so technology is just one way that we can help them globally disperse a world-class upskilling program. So the focus is on those companies and helping serve them. And that gets reinforced every day. We talk to the customers that have the problems that we kind of solve. Near term, thanks to some inspiration from some friends that have been in our network for a while, we're coming out with a product that helps companies specifically get up and onboarding quickly to automate all their upskilling for companies that are smaller, under 100. And so to be released soon, we're really excited to be the first provider to really help and get you started from ground up, as small as one person in a room coming up with an idea, and to scale alongside you as all-in-one upskilling solution.
Awesome. Okay, so last question before I hand the mic over to Tim, who has some really fun rapid fire questions for you. If you can share with the audience one book, you mentioned content and so is so important. One book, one blog, even a podcast or movie that has really shaped your career as a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'll go back to the while I've never met him or worked with him, Ben Horowitz has a great reputation. I'm a graduate of Columbia Business School, and so he was an undergrad there, and it's quite close to the network. The hard thing about hard things one of my professors in business school made me read before I started my first company. I read every word on every page, which I can't say for most books. And you start to feel, while something was very successful in the end and all the articles came out, and while it's a huge success, how many ups and downs there are. So I would say the hard things about hard things, not just set expectations for me, but actually motivated me. Because there's only a few people in the world that can go through those kind of swings in entrepreneurship and in life and come out the other side in better shape than they were at. And so I took that as kind of a challenge to say, now I understand why it's a little bit harder and why people shy away from it. But like, let's get ready for this journey.
Steve, this has been great. I have a few questions before we go into the rapid fire questions that are a bit more open-ended. And the first is, for OneRange, what are some of the most used resources that teammates are using? And so, and is it like different? Are engineers using certain resources more than, say, people that are on the business side?
Yeah, it's great. So in general, if you just look at our data, I would say 90% of our platform is pull learning. So the employee saying, I actually want this and I need this. Number one resource is usually technical upskilling related to certifications, AWS, Azure, cloud, the next version of the next language, something you need to get certified year over year. If you think about it, those normally don't come in learning development programs. They have to be paid for separately, and they have to have exams correlated with them. So that tends to be the number one in terms of volume. Number two has to do with new manager training, right? And this applies to everyone. Engineers, marketing, sales, executives. New manager training, the first time you have a subordinate, is not something people in the corporate world are typically used to if they don't have a sports, military, leadership type background. And so we see all kinds of resources, effective one-on-ones, how to manage remote hybrid, how to give constructive feedback. That's number two kind of across the board. And I will say that HR administrators love that stuff as well. So it's actually the number one ask as to what we can do to help upskill those folks in that role. It makes a big difference in the company. And number three, not much to our surprise, tends to be business applications. If you're a design product, it's going to be Figma, Adobe. If you're on the business side, Excel, PowerPoint. There's no end to the amount of upskilling you have to do to make you more productive in that world. And then companies love to get you upskilled right away on their tech stack. We use Figma, we use Salesforce, we use Keynote, right? All these different pieces. When you dive into a new company, no matter how good you were at the last technology business applications, you need to upskill to be productive right away. I would say those are the top three in terms of volume that we're seeing right now.
You have a lot of military veterans that are business leaders who listen to this podcast. Can you give us or give them a 90 to 120-second pitch on why they should use OneRange?
Yeah, so I think OneRange is the only all-in-one upskilling solution where one platform actually takes care of every person. So one size fits all has not been the motif in learning and development. When it comes to upskilling, there's no time to start it too soon. You should start it the day you incorporate your company, because learning is the most impactful thing you can do in the short, medium, and long term to not only make sure you're attracting the right people, but retaining the right people who really do care about this and making them more productive. When you talk about, business leaders in small and fast, rapidly growing companies trying to scale, the number one thing that we see and we hear about in podcasts and articles and talks from executives tends to do with adaptability. Adaptability for your product to pivot if you're a startup, adaptability to the market if valuations and capital constraints are changing. And so how do you stay adaptable? You upskill faster than every other company around there. Now, fact of the matter is, if you don't use a platform like us, you're going to spend dollars on it anyway. Your managers want their people to be upskilled, and they want to keep good people around who are trying to get upskilled. Our platform just helps leverage data and give you complete visibility into what your company's doing to stay adaptive, so you can keep up with the market, keep up with capital constraints, right? And the ebbs and flows of what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. It's really the only protection that you're going to have is making sure your people have what they need to get better each and every day.
Love it. I'm sold. In fact, I'm sold so much that we're investors in OneRange, which leads to the next question. We're investors, and so are hybrids and strivers. And so, my question is, how has the military veteran ecosystem helped, or actually might have hurt you and your company as you guys have grown?
Yeah, it's great. And I'd have to spend a lot of time thinking as to how it would have ever detracted from what we're doing here, right? I think in terms of getting capital out of the gate, and this is advice for all startup founders. Look, there's a lot of financial investors and strategic investors that know our space really well that can help shortcut and they know the KPIs and awesome. That never happens day one. It never happens year two, year three, until you get to a level where you've proven out a business that's a little bit different from theirs. What you want to do is search for folks who are cut from the same cloth or understand the cloth that you're cut from. In our case, we started the company with the backing of people who invested in my last company, people that knew Hutan and what he was trying to do in life, and then folks who believed in military veterans. Hybrids and Stivers is a great fund. They were the first fund that came in and committed. We owe them the start of the company, and we're out there working with them every single day. When I think back to why it was the case, look, software learning, B2B, they focus kind of across the board on different industries. I mean, there's ketchup companies, there's leasing companies, there's IoT companies. What they're really looking for is character. And when you start a company, you are not the expert in your space by any means, no matter what your background looks like and what you're trying to do, because no one's done it before. And so you're cutting down to the character and how you know that person's going to act. And so even when I'm working with other military veterans, advising, asking for advice, asking for connection, there's always a common thread of knowing that you're helping that person and a certain level of character that you can relate to. And so, you know, I'll share quickly like the way that happened. And Karina and Lenore, I don't know if you know this, like for happenstance, but when Hutan and I were going through this journey of what we were actually going to build, and we thought of upskilling, I sent out a survey, right? It's like the classic Qualtrics. Have you ever taken an online course? Does your company sponsor it? So I was trying to get some data that wasn't available on Google. Someone that responded was a business school classmate of mine who was a Naval Academy grad. That person said, hey, like, would love to help with the journey, answered the survey. This stuff's kind of interesting. What can I do to help? Cool. Hey, we're going to raise money. That's how we're going to start the company. Could use some connections. He mentioned that he had a friend who actually knew Tim and introduced me to Tim the next day. I get a lot of introductions, right? Some of them go nowhere. Some of them you talk to, you're getting feedback. The relationship with Tim ended up getting us into Hybrids and Strivers, building that relationship, eventually getting funding. Here, 3 years later, we have the privilege of having Tim as an investor in Context coming in and working with us. So the journey of Context investing looks on paper like it's been 2 months, but in actuality, it's been about 3.5 years since I've known Tim. And my friend John, because he didn't have any loyalty or need to, but wanted to help, was a military person who introduced me to Tim, who had no reason to help me besides maybe he saw some similarities in his military background and likes to work with good people, introduced me to a group that had the ability and invested at that time because they also understood the character. Notice in none of that I said learning, upskilling, this is what we do. You do not have to specialize in that kind of stuff. You just have to trust that the characters of the founders that you believe in are going to take it somewhere it needs to go. And so non-industry specific, hang out with me as a founder, open your network and do what we need to do usually makes it exciting for those first time investors as well. And that's how everything came together for us so far.
You've been talking a lot about team, and teams use OneRange to get better. I want to click on two themes around teams. One is this Context is definitely not a Tim show. In fact, if anything, the understanding of how OneRange could be really powerful is a conversation Karina and I have been having about upskilling teammates and how to upskill them. And we're so grateful that Lenore's joined us. And speaking of the veteran ecosystem, she comes from First In, and everyone's just trying to help everyone. The second thing around team that I want to ask you about is Hutan. So Hutan is a civilian. We call civilian allies. I mean, I know that's kind of probably cheesy, but hivers and strivers and ourselves feel that Hutan is such a great and kind of your yin to your yang, or his yang to your yin. Like, how's that been? How has that relationship evolved, and how's that co-founder kind of bond going?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, look, it's early stage investors should be asking about co-founder relationships. If you look at the statistics of how it works, it doesn't work. Really tough. Quick fact, my first business, we started with 3 co-founders. One I went to school with, he was my catcher. We played baseball together on the team at Yale. We ended up firing him. It wasn't a good fit. All that is to say is we were very intentional, not even with the idea to start, but with co-founders. And there's 2 things that Hutan and I really worked on to make sure that it was a good co-founder fit. One had to do with distinction of skills. We literally mapped out the 8 functional pieces of businesses that we thought were important: brand, product, team, operations, finance, right? All these things. He has the skills and can lead 4 out of 8. I have the skills, need and want to have the other sections, right? So what we learned from our background is I had an MBA co-founder in my last business, a lot of overlapping skills, which is good, but can be bad. And in his last business, he had an engineering co-founder, which could be good and could be bad. We decided that we had enough skills together to each lead sections of the business and not overlap each other almost whatsoever. Outside of governance, administration, and how to run an overarching business, we separate it so well, and it's allowed us to go faster. The other piece of it comes down to what type of founder are you? Do you like the power? Are you in it to build? Are you looking for financial incentives? And so a lot of pieces I learned along my journey to look out for the folks that think the same way that you do. Hutan is not someone who is looking to start a company for power, so he has the ability to hire people under him to get done what he says. And so that's kind of what resonated with me right off the bat. So we thought that would be a fit. Look, as a civilian, I've known and I've been best friends with Hutan for 9 years. I met him when he started his first business. We love talking about technology together. He worked at Lockheed Martin, a defense contractor, so he worked for the military for years. So he always felt part of understanding what was going on, at least on the technology side. And we got along for all those years and became fast friends because of my love for technology and what I admired him for, and his love for business and what he admired me for. But it was kind of a match made in heaven. I mean, during COVID is when we decided to start this company, and we were remote at that time, couldn't be together. And I remember I call it to my wife, popping the question to Hutan, like, do you feel the same way I do, that we would be a really good fit and anything we worked on would accelerate really quick? Like, our number one priority is to get a good co-founder. And luckily over Zoom, he said yes. And when I moved back up to New York and we were able to get together, it kind of accelerated from there. So it's important. It's the most important thing you could have in functionally starting a business.
Great advice, and so important around great co-founder relationships. We're going to now close out the podcast with hopefully some fun rapid fire questions. What are some of your favorite vacation spots, or your favorite vacation spot?
Greece by far. Island hopping, doing the whole thing on yacht has been my favorite vacation to date. I would also say exploring different cultures and areas. And so I was able a few years ago to go to Southeast Asia and explore all the different cultures they have there with family. And it's been awesome. Generally, I look for beach towns. And so we have some things coming up in the future, more along the lines of Belize and things like that. But anywhere I can kind of relax, but also learn about the culture is very appealing to me. Tons of places I haven't been in this world I'd like to get to.
What are some of your favorite movies?
Number one, Charlie Wilson's War. Great blend of sarcastic comedy, history, and a little bit of understanding of what you don't learn in school. Having been part of that world, I admire the political side, the intelligence side, the military side, the covert aspect of it, and I just can't stop laughing. It's one of those movies that you turn on, and wherever it is, you have to finish it, no matter what you have ahead of you. I also like the clever movies, the Lucky Number 11, Boondock Saints, and probably at the top of that list would be Usual Suspects. Twists and turns and kind of character development just all played great roles in those films. I've been successful in getting my wife to watch like 2 out of 3, but I've made her watch Charlie Wilson's War multiple times. So I know it's not just me that loves that movie.
Twists and turns, character development sounds a lot like startups. What are some of your favorite musicians or bands?
I get into to the hard rock space. My top band is probably Breaking Benjamin. They're out live and on tour, and they've evolved over the past 15 to 20 years to be extremely good and put out new music. I also like bands Bring Me the Horizon. There's one or two that are escaping me right now that I really love, and every time I hear them, I have to kind of stop and try to share them with someone. I was always known, I had Metallica as a walkout song, and so I always listen to this hard rock stuff I try to share it with whomever will listen, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. But anyone that performs great live music as well, I get into now in my non-competitive playing days.
Speaking of heavy metal or hard rock, Halloween is coming up. What are some of your favorite snacks or candy if you have a sweet tooth?
I pretty much eat anything besides candy corn. I never got it or understood it outside of it being a decoration. I don't know if I'm like the only one in that world, but look, anything with milk chocolate, the Snickers, the Twixes, love that kind of stuff.
Steve, thank you so very much for joining us on this podcast. Thank you so much for being a great military veteran founder and ambassador for our community. We're rooting for you. If you're a listener and you want to learn more about OneRange, please go to onerange.co. We'll have the link in our show notes. Steve again. Steve, Karina, Lenore, this has been great. Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Absolute pleasure.